Good afternoon, and welcome to the August edition of the Q&A Virtual Lunch Hour with me, Jason Killeen. I'm an Assistant Executive Director with the Department of Cannabis Regulation. Yesterday, the department sponsored a webinar on the public convenience or necessity process. So we may get some questions today about that process. And to the extent that yesterday's webinar covered it, we did post the webinar materials as well as the PowerPoint up on our website earlier today. So it is accessible. So just to be cognizant of the questions and the volume of questions coming in, I may defer questions that would be answered through yesterday's webinar to yesterday's webinar. And then of course, as part of yesterday's webinar, we did have a PowerPoint presentation that linked a lot of information to the reasons why a PCN request may be made, the community plans that are unduly concentrated, how to utilize the DCR licensing map to, toggle on and toggle off different layers so that you can find out whether or not a proposed location is within one of the 5 CPAs that has reached undue concentration. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started and jump into the question and answer session.
Good afternoon, Jason and everyone. Our first question comes from Laura D. I have a license for delivery. I was told if they're in 2 separate buildings, I can have a storefront there too. If I meet all zoning requirements, can I have a storefront where my delivery is?
So one parcel or one building can accommodate more than one licensed commercial cannabis activity. In order to apply for the retail storefront activity, you would have had to have been selected as part of Phase 3 Retail Round 1 or Phase 3 Retail Round 2 if you're applying in a community plan area that has not reached undue concentration. And then yesterday, we opened up the pre-application process for social equity applicants that are looking to apply for the retail storefront activity in one of the 5 community plan areas that have reached undue concentration. So technically, more than one commercial cannabis activity can be co-located on a single parcel in one or more of the buildings located on that parcel. But to the extent that you want to apply for retail storefront, it is whether or not you have been selected to either participate in one of the Phase 3 retail rounds, or if you're going to be applying in an area that's subject to a finding of undue concentration.
Thank you for that. Our next question also comes from Laura. Can I still get a state license?
The state is no longer issuing new provisional licenses. So if you are pursuing a state license, it would have to go through their annual application process, and you'll need to meet the local requirements to receive an annual license from the city so that we can adopt the corresponding environmental findings so that you can meet the requirements for a complete state application. So you can apply for an annual state license. You will not be able to meet those requirements until you've received your local city annual license, though.
Our next question comes from 2 individuals, Demetria C. and Nick S. When is the next lottery and how many people will be selected?
I don't have an estimated time when we'll conduct the next lottery. And ultimately, the number of folks that can be selected is based on whatever license capacity is remaining at that time. We do have hundreds of pending applications that, as we start to issue additional licenses, it reduces the number of folks that can be selected in a future lottery. To the extent possible, please sign up for any alerts and notifications through the DCR website and keep an eye on the website. We do have a responsibility to publicly notice the next lottery in advance of it. So we would have to, at a minimum, post something on the website, but most likely the director would have us do some kind of webinar and let folks know who's eligible to submit a lottery record, as well as when the lottery would occur.
The next question from Michael C. What is a pre-application record request and who can apply for one?
So the pre-application record process is where an applicant proposes a business premises location. They pay the $597 pre-application review fee, and then we determine whether or not the property is properly zoned and distanced from sensitive uses. So it's the kind of initial step for getting the ability to submit an application. Pre-application records may be deemed ineligible if they don't comply, or ultimately they may be deemed eligible for further processing, which enables the requester to then submit an annual license application.
Okay, from Michelle M. How much are fees to open a dispensary and what do I need to do to apply?
So the local application fees exceed $10,000 between the pre-application review fee, the legal business entity record fees, the actual application fees per activity, and depending on whether or not you're applying as a social equity applicant, making sure that the equity share review has been done for your legal business entity. The fee amounts that are listed under LAMC section 10419 are still current. What we've done is we've kind of created new record types to eliminate the need to do the equity share review for new applications, provided we've done it on the legal business entity record. So we're charging the $5,720 application fee for activity instead of the $69.69 fee for social equity licenses, provided we've done the equity share review on the legal business entity record. And then, the fees are all available on the department's website. We have links there.
We have a question from two individuals, Shantia P. and Rasmik K. What do I need to do to qualify for a license? And do I need to pay fees upfront to be eligible and receive a license?
Yes and yes. So we've got a number of different webinars and materials on the website to kind of walk folks through the process soup to nuts, but you'd have to register for a business tax registration certificate. You'd have to register the legal business entity that is looking for the opportunity to apply for the license. Once you've met those two steps, you can start the pre-application process where we can vet the proposed business premises location. You don't have to have site control at that point. And then ultimately, if the proposed location would be eligible for processing for whatever activities you want to apply for, you'd have the opportunity to submit your annual license application, at which point you would have to secure the location and then submit the application materials. General applicants can apply for distribution, non-volatile manufacturing activities, the testing lab, cultivation processor activities, and then verified social equity individual applicants can apply for delivery and the nurturing activity, as well as the activities that general applicants can apply for. And then only a select few social equity individual applicants that were selected as part of phase 3 retail round 1 or round 2 have the ability to apply for the retail storefront activity in community plan areas that are not unduly concentrated. And then we just opened up the pre-application process for PCN in the 5 community plan areas that reached undue concentration, and verified social equity applicants have the ability to start the pre-application process in those 5 community plan areas as of yesterday. And then the window to submit those pre-application records closes on Tuesday, August 29th at 11:59 p.m. local time.
Okay, our next question comes from Jess P. I need to learn how to develop a plan for a micro license. How do I get help?
So at the local level, the micro business license is a form of retail license. And it could be the full micro business, which would allow for on-site retail sales. In order to apply for that license type locally, you would have had to have been selected as part of phase 3 round 1, phase 3 round 2, or you would have to be applying for that license type in a community plan area that's subject to a finding of undue concentration and be a social equity individual applicant. So if you are a social equity individual applicant, DCR's social equity program has a number of online resources, courses to help you navigate starting a commercial cannabis business. And you may be eligible for one-on-one coaching. The social equity program does have a dedicated website, which is dcrsep.org. So you can check the department's website, you can look at the resources there, and then you can go to the dcrsep.org website and see whether or not you may be eligible for one-on-one coaching. So those are some resources that would assist you.
This is a similar question coming from Ron B, and he asks, how does he get help with the licensing process overall?
Again, we've got a number of webinars and information on the DCR website that's available to everybody who's a prospective applicant. And then for social equity individual applicants, there's more dedicated resources. The department has a learning management system where there's a lot of additional webinars and materials to assist people in understanding how to open and operate a commercial cannabis business. And then the social equity team, again, has a dedicated website, which is dcrsep.org, where they've got dedicated courses, and you may be able to request one-on-one coaching if you are a verified social equity individual applicant.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Rachel W. And she asks, now that provisional application deadline has passed, what is the time frame for approvals for an annual license? Also, what's the time frame for approval for social equity non-retail delivery application?
I mean, the process for the non-retail activities, including the retail delivery option, which only allows offsite sales, is generally 3 to 6 months if an applicant has all of their application materials put together and they get submitted and they get vetted through the process. For the retail storefront activities, it takes longer to go through the annual licensing process because the department is required to conduct community meetings as well as make a recommendation to the Cannabis Regulation Commission, and then they have to hold a public hearing to hear the recommendation to issue the annual license. And, you know, at the local level, you'll need to navigate through our annual license application process so that we can adopt our local environmental report, which is a prerequisite to have a complete state application because they are looking for a finalized environmental document.
Our next question comes from Shady M. How do I move forward after not being approved by SCIA, and how do I get funding?
Well, if you have not been verified as a social equity individual applicant, you can apply as a general applicant for the activities that are available to general applicants. And then in terms of fundraising, you know, you will have to look for co-investors or other folks that would be interested in purchasing equity in the applicant entity. The DCR doesn't get involved in, you know, applicants' business decisions, and we don't do any matchmaking as it relates to matching up prospective applicants with folks that are looking to invest in commercial cannabis companies. If you do want to apply as a social equity individual applicant, hopefully a new filing window will open up sometime either later this year or early next year. And then that would give you the opportunity to get verified as an individual and then be able to, if you are verified, apply for activities that are limited to social equity applicants.
Lindsay asked, what is the detailed process for approving a new address and why does it cost so much?
So the pre-application review fee, which is the land use fee, is $597. The fee is comprised of the level of effort to validate whether or not a proposed location meets the zoning and distancing requirements articulated in the code, as well as to update and maintain the website for utilizing the research tools tied to the land use review. In terms of applications, the application fees are, set by code, and they're looking at the documents that are tied to a given address, the business premises diagram, the inspections that go along with the physical address, and everything is site specific and set at full cost recovery. So it really depends on, what the question is as it relates to a new address, whether it's just going through the pre-application review process or it's actually about filing an application at a different address and then meeting all of the requirements to get licensed.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Hugo M. If I have a social equity micro business, can I apply for a PCN storefront as well and add it to my micro license?
Again, this gets into the nuanced difference between the local nomenclature and the state nomenclature. So at the local level, micro business is associated with some form of retail. The type 12 micro business is effectively a retail storefront that allows for on-site sales. And then the type 9 micro business, which is the off-site sales through a delivery license, are standalone license types at the local level. At the state level, the Department of Cannabis Control offers a micro business license that's any 3 commercial cannabis activities. So you could get a state micro business, which only deals with non-retail, distribution, manufacturing, cultivation, but that doesn't translate to what we recognize as being a micro business license, which is a type 12 or a type 9 license at the local level. And it's always associated with the retail activity at the local level. So the micro business license types are limited to social equity applicants through January 1st of 2025. And, if you are a verified social equity applicant and you're applying for the PCN process in an area that's subject to a finding of undue concentration, you would have the opportunity to apply at the local level for that standalone micro business license. And if you have that license plus at least 2 additional licenses at the local level, you could apply for what the Department of Cannabis Controls refers to as a micro business, which is at 3 or more activities at one, premises.
Our next question comes from Hugo M. And he asks, if I have a phase 2 license that was before social equity, can I sell it and not have a social equity status follow it?
A phase 2 license is going to have either the social equity designation for a tier 1 or a tier 2 license, or a general designation for a tier 3 license, but the designation will follow the license for the tier 3s until the social equity agreement requirements have been met. So a tier 3 license would be transferable as a general license only after the social equity agreement requirements have been met. And folks can change the kind of designation on a phase 2 license by making ownership changes up until the point an annual license has been issued. So if a tier 1 or a tier 2 license effectively sold, the social equity individual applicant sold the equity such that it fell below the threshold set, it could only move forward through annual licensing as a tier 3, at which point the entity would have to enter into a social equity agreement with the city and then satisfy those social equity agreement requirements. And then once those requirements have been satisfied, it's just a general license like any other general license that could be transferred subject to the ownership modification requirements.
Our next question comes from Ariella J. When submitting an When submitting an entity substitution, is the modification done on the annual record or the LBER record?
The modification will ultimately affect the ANN record. So the legal business entity record is tied to an entity and tied to a BTRC. And then the individual activity records, whether it's a pre-app or an ANN record, those are children of that legal business entity record. So when we process an entity substitution modification request, once it's been processed, the new legal business entity that has its own BTRC would get an application record underneath it to facilitate that substitution. So the modification goes against the application, the ANN record, but you will have to identify the legal business entity record that we would be transferring the application or license opportunity to. So in order to start the entity substitution process, a legal business entity record would have to be submitted for the entity that you plan to transfer the opportunity to, whether it's the application opportunity or the license.
Okay, our next question comes from 7B. Can an applicant submit an LBER without a location? One of the forms requires a location to be entered.
You'll have to identify an address for the legal business entity record. It could be the corporate address, the mailing address, whatever address you're providing to the California Secretary of State for the purposes of establishing the entity with them. The location tied to the legal business entity record does not have to be the location where you're proposing to conduct commercial cannabis activity. That location would be identified when you submit your pre-application record, and then we would vet that proposed address for whether or not it complies with the land use requirements for that specific commercial cannabis activity. So think about the legal business entity record as the corporate headquarters or whatever address you want associated with that legal entity record and where you want notifications to be mailed for the legal entity record. And then any of the application records that get submitted, those would be site specific for commercial cannabis activities. They don't have to be the same address.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from 7B. Why did it go from taking 10 days to do a pre-application review for sensitive uses to over 3 months?
So we had all hands on deck as we were processing pre-application review records at the local level to help applicants get their local compliance underway letters so that they could meet the state's March 31st deadline to apply for a new provisional license. So that was a period of time where folks were working overtime to help facilitate getting things processed at the local level in order to meet an unrelated state deadline and to try to give folks the opportunity to be successful in the state's provisional process. It's not sustainable. We have expedited fees and other fees that could be charged for that higher level of service and turnaround time. The other thing is we were also providing folks just fee deferrals so that we could immediately start to process the pre-app records versus under normal circumstances, we don't even touch the pre-application review records and start to look at it for compliance with the code until the fees get paid. So there are a number of records that have been submitted that have been there that have outstanding fees, and we don't begin to do our analysis until such fees get paid.
Our next question comes from Levon E. When will LADCR update the licensing map? I thought it was supposed to be updated on August 1st. Thank you.
So we download the publicly available information on a quarterly basis. So on August 1st, we downloaded all of the publicly available sensitive use information, but it takes a couple of weeks to scrub that data and then convert it into layers and then actually update the licensing map. So I anticipate that the layers will be refreshed within the next week. I'm hoping to have it done by Friday, but I can't make any promises. But we have the data. We're in the process of scrubbing the data to generate the layering that you have available on the map. And then once that's done, we'll start to push the new layers to the map.
Our next question comes from Ron S. When will the regular applicant, not social equity, be able to apply for a retail store license in LA County?
The city of LA doesn't handle any of the application processes for the county of Los Angeles. So if you're looking to apply in an area outside of the city, you'll have to check with the local jurisdiction, or for the areas that are unincorporated, you'll have to go to their Office of Cannabis Management website. And I think it's dcba.lacounty.gov/cannabis for more information. We only handle areas within the city of Los Angeles. And again, the retail activities are limited to social equity applicants through January 1st of 2025. So at the earliest, general applicants would be able to participate in the retail storefront lottery process or PCN process would be January 1st, 2025.
Okay, thank you. From Danny A, his question is, can the lottery round applications at the discretion of an SE partner be dropped to tier 2 ownership?
No. So the lottery applications have to comply with the updated 10420 requirements, which require that the social equity applicant have at least a 51% equity stake owned by social equity individual applicants. So to make the process easier for people to comply, we've eliminated the requirement that requires one social equity individual applicant to hold all 51%, to allow multiple social equity individual applicants to aggregate their equity share in the applicant entity to meet the 51%. But tier 2 was a concept that really went with phase 2. And, now any of the social equity records that we're looking at, it has to have 51% of the equity associated with verified social equity individual applicants, and there's no way to drop below that 51% threshold. But you can look for other social equity individual applicants to purchase equity within the entity applying for the license to meet that 51% ownership requirement.
The next question comes from Kion B. Are social equity applicants still priority for non-retail storefront delivery and distribution?
Can you just repeat that one more time?
Of course. Are social equity applicants still priority for non-retail storefront delivery and distribution?
So social equity applicants can apply for the non-storefront delivery and distribution. For the distribution license type, that's available to all prospective applicants. And, requests are processed on a first come, first served basis based on the filing dates, which includes the submission of all of the required materials and the payment of applicable fees. Separately, only social equity applicants can apply for the delivery, which allows for offsite retail sales. So only SEIAs at this point are actually submitting records. And again, they're all processed on that first come, first served basis based on the filing date. So social equity applicants have priority to apply for the retail storefront and non-storefront delivery, the cultivation, the nursery license types through January 1st of 2025. And it's exclusive to social equity applicants that either have pending applications or were selected through a lottery, or submit an application because there's not a cap on that activity type, like the non-storefront delivery option.
Our next question comes from Rakija M. When are they going to waive DCR fees?
So the city's general fund has not provided DCR with any funding to provide fee waivers. The fee waiver monies that we've been able to allocate in the past have all come from state grants. There's a limited amount of fee waivers that we had allocated for phase 3 retail round 2. Separate from that, we have the local jurisdictions assistance grant award, and the state has notified us that those monies can only be utilized to provide waivers for folks that have provisional licenses, which means that new applicants that have not received a provisional license from the state are not eligible for waivers from that funding source. Ultimately, for folks that are eligible for waivers, it's a review of the record and whether or not the applicant meets the processing requirements for the waiver. And we have a waiver button on our payment module on the record now to allow for us to apply those records. So I would recommend reaching out to your analyst to talk about your specific record to see whether or not you are eligible for a waiver, and if so, where the waiver would be coming from.
Rakija also has this question: where are the funding resources, and when will we get help?
So to the extent that funding resources are available for waivers, they're provided by state grants, and the grants determine who the eligible applicants are to receive those. The city's general fund has provided us with funding to provide business licensing and compliance assistance, which Dr. B and the social equity team use to pay for the contractual services and the vendors that are putting together materials to support the social equity program. But the council has expressly prohibited us from using any of those monies for waivers and or direct financial assistance. So all of the direct financial assistance that goes either directly to applicants or to waivers of DCR fees comes from state grants. And, those state grant monies have been diminishing over time as more jurisdictions create social equity programs and compete for the limited funding that the state makes available for those grant opportunities. But Dr. Brown and the SEP team, will post on the website any additional opportunities that come up that allow for that direct financial assistance.
Nick S. is asking, are there any updates on cultivation licensing? Will cultivation be chosen by lottery or PCN?
There's not an ETA on when DCR will begin accepting cultivation applications again. If the cultivation application process stays as is, then we would most likely need to administer a lottery for those opportunities in the community plan areas that have not reached undue concentration. And then to the extent that the city council adopts a resolution with PCN findings that could be applied to the cultivation activity, DCR could open it up and administer a PCN filing period in the areas that have reached undue concentration. But there's still some policy decisions and actions that the city council would need to take before we can open up that the application filing period for that activity again.
Our next question from Danny A. What is the August 29th pre-application deadline regarding PCN?
So yesterday, DCR opened up a 2-week filing period for prospective social equity applicants to submit a pre-application record for business premises that are located in community plan areas that are unduly concentrated. So between now and 11:59 p.m. on August 29th, social equity applicants can submit a pre-application record for the retail storefront activity in the Central City North, Harbor Gateway, Sherman Oaks, and Venice community plan areas. And once the 2-week filing period closes, we will review the records to make sure that they're properly submitted. They are associated with a legal business entity that has requested equity share review and has at least a verified social equity individual applicant associated with it, and it is in one of those unduly concentrated areas. And if it meets those requirements, we will issue invoices for those records on August 30th, and then folks that wish to pay the fee and go through the pre-application review process will have 30 days to pay their fee, and then DCR will have 30 days from the date of payment to complete our pre-application review. And then, of course, once we've done the pre-application review, records that meet the zoning and distancing requirements would be eligible to go into the formal PCN process, at which point DCR would invoice the $1,592 PCN fee and then give folks the 30 days to pay the fee. And our plan is to transmit any of the eligible PCN requests to the City Council for consideration the week of November 13th. Because City Council is on recess that week, which gives the City Clerk a week to review the record, create the council files, and get the PCN request uploaded to the council file. And then once we have a council file number, folks participating in the PCN process will be able to send out their stakeholder letters to receive stakeholder feedback. We'll be able to notify city councils and neighborhood councils and other folks that the PCN requests have come in and where they can upload their public comments. And that starts the 90-day period for council consideration. But soup to nuts for this process, it will take 6 months to fully administer, and the 90th day won't fall until sometime in February of 2024. And then at some point, we would be able to open up a new PCN filing period in 2024. So
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we probably talked for 30 minutes on the presentation and did at least a half hour of Q&A just on the PCN process yesterday. And again, that webinar and the associated materials are on the DCR website. So if you have questions related to PCN, I would refer you to those resources.
Thanks, Jason. Sorry for the interruption. The next question comes from Anthony K. And he asks, can a minor own a cannabis company?
A minor can own a cannabis company. There's a couple of different ways that ownership can be effectuated. You know, a minor may be the successor of a verified social equity individual applicant, and they were named as the beneficiary. The equity stake for the minor can be held in trust until the minor comes of age. If you have questions about how to structure it, I would recommend you going out and seeking legal advice on how to kind of structure it and the pros and cons for different ownership structures. The one thing a minor can't do is a minor would not be able to work at the location, even if they are an owner or a partial owner of a license. So the operating rules are very different than the ownership rules. So, you may want to seek legal advice or subject matter expert advice on that specific nuance as well.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question from Jerome T. Is there any assistance from the department if we are having issues with our landlord and need to move?
So the DCR does not get involved in private business disputes, including landlord-tenant disputes. If you've lost site control of your location, you would submit a business premises surrender form. And then depending on where you are in the process, you may have the ability to refile and find a new compliant location and submit a new pre-application record for that location. Or if you've received a license, you would be eligible to submit a relocation request. One of the big things that we've done with the updated ordinance is there's a differentiation of a license and then the ability to operate using that license. So licenses can be relocated. Temporary approval licenses that are relocated still have to go through the full annual license process at the new location because we do need to review it for CEQA compliance and then adopt environmental findings tied to that location. So if you have temporary approval, that process hasn't been completed for that new location versus if you have an annual license, which nobody locally has, we've already gone through the CEQA process and adopted the findings, and those findings may be transferable to another compliant location. And again, we only have jurisdiction over the city of Los Angeles. So a license that meets the requirements, that's properly zoned and meets the distancing, that moves to another compliant location that meets the sensitive uses within the city, those environmental findings generally can be transferred to that new location. Reach out to your analyst so they can look at your specific record and where your record is in our process, and then they can provide guidance on if you lose site control, whether or not you're eligible for the relocation or whether or not your record would be abandoned, and if you will meet the requirements to refile.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question from Yvonne D. Is also about location, but slightly different. What are the options for an applicant who is experiencing issues with their landlord when they are in the pre-application phase? Can the applicant submit a modification to relocate to a new property and continue to submit for a pre-application review?
So pre-application records have the one landowner attestation document and they're site specific. So you can't modify a pre-application record. If you can't move forward with the pre-application record as submitted, it's either going to be deemed abandoned if it hasn't been processed yet, or you can withdraw the pre-application review record. If your pre-application review record was created out of a lottery record, your assigned analyst could reset the lottery record to allow for you to submit a new pre-application record. Basically, abandonment or withdrawal as part of the pre-application phase may give you the opportunity just to submit a new pre-application review record at a location you may be able to execute a lease or gain site control of. Once you get into the application process, you can't relocate unless you have received a license. So if you can't get site control or you lose site control, you are required to submit the business premises surrender form, at which point the record can be abandoned, and depending on whether or not it was ever deemed filed would determine whether or not it would be eligible for refiling.
Our next question comes from Cordell B. Can you name all the communities that are in the Harbor Gateway area? And also, where exactly are Central City and Central North areas located within the city of LA?
The Harbor Gateway Community Plan area is a subset of Council District 15, and it's the area of the city that connects South and Southeast Los Angeles with the San Pedro and Port areas. Central City and Central City North cover generally like downtown Los Angeles, and then the area that goes up to Boyle Heights, which is its own community plan area. Yesterday's Intro to PCN webinar has a couple of slides and links to the DCR licensing map. And from the DCR licensing map, the default is to have the community plan areas turned on. And there's a search function there, so you can look to see if a property is located in any of the community plan areas that are unduly concentrated. So for more information, please refer to yesterday's webinar.
Our next question comes from Samuel N. What areas have PCN license? What areas are PCN licenses available?
Pre-application review records can be submitted for retail storefront by social equity applicants in the Central City, Central City North, Harbor Gateway, Sherman Oaks, and Venice community plan areas. So if you have more questions about how you can look to see if a location is within one of those areas and what the process is, please refer to the Intro to PCN webinar on the department's website.
Thanks, Jason. Our next question comes from Timothy I. How long does land use take for approval after a pre-app is submitted?
So the land use process can take 30 days from the date that the pre-application record is deemed filed. And that date is, the pre-app record gets created. You'll have to pay the $597 invoice for the pre-application review fee, as well as submit a completed ownership attestation form. And it's only deemed filed after the record's been created, the attestation has been submitted, and the fee has been paid. So 30 days from that date is the general estimate.
A follow-up question from Timothy. Are boardwalks and beaches considered sensitive use locations? or are they okay if zoned right?
It depends. So I would use the DCR licensing map to identify whether or not that boardwalk or beach is considered a parks and recreation location if it falls under the sensitive use definition of parks. So we go based on the publicly available information based on the code. So if it's recognized as a park under the control of the city, it's a sensitive use. If it's not recognized as a park or other sensitive use under the code, we don't consider it a sensitive use for our purposes. It's either there or it's not.
Our next question comes from MS. When will relocation modifications be accepted again?
We're kind of in one of those areas where everybody is going to have to get an annual license in order to relocate their state record. So if you've lost site control and you submit the premises diagram form or the business premises surrender form, then we can abandon the record, which may open up the door for refiling. If you relocate a TMP record, you only have up to 180 days to continue operating at your current location, at which point the current record would get closed out and you'll be tied to the new business premises you've identified, and you'll have to work towards annual licensure at that location. And we're, based on the fact that we're using the LJAG fees to provide fee waivers and to do the environmental reviews, you're only going to get the fee waivers for the one record going through the process. So, assuming that this is about a specific record and specific applicant needs, reach out to your assigned analyst so that they can get information about the specific record and then provide you with the options.
Our next question, I think there was a similar question earlier. I'll ask it again. It's from MS. How often does the licensing map get updated?
So we downloaded the new sensitive use data for the quarter on August 1st. We're in the process of creating the updated layers. We hope to have them pushed to the map within the next week. When we do push the updated sensitive uses to the map, we will be refreshing the different layers for the retail storefront activity. So updates on the pre-app, updates on the mod, updates on the pending applications, updates on the licenses. And I don't want to overpromise, but it'll be updated in the next week. And hopefully we're able to start pushing things on Friday.
Great. I think this might be our last question, Jason. So good timing. This one is from Rahim G. Can a phase 2 cultivation with provisional license add a nursery to the facility? If so, will it get a provisional status or will it have to go through the annual process?
So it would have to go through the annual process because the state's no longer issuing new provisional licenses. So we don't add activities to existing records anymore. Because the records are at different places and some activities may have provisional licenses and temporary approval and other activities wouldn't. When you want to add an activity to an existing location, you just submit a new record, and then that record will have its own status and will report separately the status of that record to the state. So it doesn't positively or negatively impact whatever your existing record is. And that's just the cleanest way to handle it. At a later date, once you've had, if you get annual licenses and operating permits and you have your state annual licenses, there's a way to consolidate authorized activities onto a single record, but the activities all have to have the same licensing status and application status, both at the local and state level to do it.
Thank you, Jason. I think we're all done.
Wonderful. So I just want to thank everybody for taking their time out of their day. Our team will get the webinar posted to our website hopefully by the end of the week. And then our next Q&A virtual lunch will be on Wednesday, September 13th at noon. So I look forward to talking to people then. Thank you all. Bye.